All right, good evening, everyone. First off, I'd like to take a moment and thank each one of you for coming out tonight. My name is Yasna, and I will be your host tonight. I'd like to begin with thanking the community of progressive Pakistani-Canadians for hosting this event with us. I'd also like to thank the executive team members, Mala John, who's our events director, Humayun, who's our finance director, Mohan, who's our VP, Ali, who's our president. I'd also like to thank myself. I am the social media news director. Before we begin, I'd like to explain the format of tonight, how it's going to go. We're going to have a back and forth discussion, which will cover some of the history and political decisions, which ultimately resulted in the current conditions in Afghanistan and Pakistan. After all the speakers had a chance to speak, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end for you guys. Our first two speakers from the Afghans Against Extremism will cover the events which took place in Afghanistan, while the community of progressive Pakistani-Canadians will explain what was happening in Pakistan during that time. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ali Aziz, who's the founder of the Afghan Students Against Extremism, as well as the Afghans Against Extremism. This individual is very passionate and strongly believes that these issues will be solved one day by starting here in this room. And Ali will also be covering the first half of the events which took place in Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Ali.
So, hello to everyone. I'd like to start by explaining what we mean when we call ourselves Afghans Against Extremism. When we use the term extremist, we mean two things: regional organized terrorist organizations such as the Taliban, such as Al-Qaeda, and now ISIS, which has also found its way into Afghanistan, and what we call extremist culture. For example, I'm sure many of you remember what happened to Farkhunda in Kabul, and there was also the recent story about a husband cutting off his wife's nose in Afghanistan. This is a result of what we would call extremist culture. When you have a country that has been decimated by war for decades, such as Afghanistan, then that country becomes susceptible to extremist right-wing terrorist organizations, such as the Taliban. Even worse, when these events occur in a consecutive sequence, an entire generation, which was born during a time of heavy violence and radicalization, falls prey to extremist culture. It is incredibly important, however, that we recognize that extremist culture is the direct result of decades of radicalization by groups which impose a specific ideology on a population. Now that our definition of extremism has been defined, the next question is obvious. What do we mean when we say we're against extremism? Specifically, how are we against extremism? And how do we combat extremism? Before we can answer this question, before we can move forward, we have to first look back at what it was that led us here. With that in mind, I'd like to begin our timeline by focusing on some of the social and democratic reforms which took place in Afghanistan all throughout the 20th century. From there, I will explain in greater detail the events in the 1960s and 1970s, which would eventually result in the country's downfall and ultimately lead to the rise of the Taliban, which by 1996 took control of most of the country, including the capital city of Kabul. At the start of the 20th century, in 1923, Amin-Ullah Khan, the Emir of Afghanistan, secured the ratification of Afghanistan's first written constitution. Although still an Islamic state, governed by Sharia, the new constitution guaranteed that all Afghans subjects would have equal rights in accordance with the laws of the state. The constitution also guaranteed greater rights and greater rights to religious and ethnic minorities such as the Hazaras, who were predominantly Shia Muslims and so were massacred and enslaved in the 19th century by Abdul Rahman Khan for both their ethnical and religious minority status. The 1923 constitution abolished slavery, torture, and forced labor. It stated that other religious minorities, such as Hindus and Jews, were also entitled to the protection of the state. Finally, elementary education for all Afghans, regardless of sex or ethnic makeup, became compulsory.
Thank you so much, Ali. Now I'd like to introduce our second speaker on the panel, who's a writer and a poet, an award-winning artist who promotes unity and respect for the nation. Through his life, with first-hand experience of living under the extremist regime, he understands the fundamentals of extremism and what it does to an individual living under it. He expresses his views through his music by promoting unity and against extremism. He now is a global political major and hoping one day to lead the nation from these extremists and make it the beautiful country it is. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Vice President of the
Hello everybody, before I begin I would like to thank you all for joining us on this evening. I'm glad to see the exec and all the general members alongside with other student associations, representative of multicultural clubs and other organizations who are present here on this evening. Afghans Against Extremism is an open group that is strongly against any extremist movements. Afghans Against Extremism is here to raise an awareness about the extreme culture that has taken away many innocent lives, especially in Afghanistan. Continuing on where Ali has covered, after Muhammad Dawood Khan's death, his government was overthrown and most of his family members have been killed. At this point, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, under the leadership of Nur Muhammad Taraki, came to power. Taraki was declared Afghanistan's new president and prime minister as he appointed Hafizullah Amin as deputy minister. Not long after, the American ambassador Adolf Dutz was assassinated. As a result, the Americans cut assistance to Afghanistan and power struggle began between Muhammad Taraki and Hafizullah Amin. On September 14th, Hafizullah Amin's supporters confront and kill Taraki, which effectively made Hafizullah Amin Afghanistan's new president just months after Taraki caught up against Dawood. On the other side, the Soviets were told by its KGB spies that Hafizullah Amin's rule was a threat for Central Asia and Hafizullah Amin could not be trusted. Central Asia that was controlled by USSR, such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. The Soviets also thought that Hafizullah Amin was behind the assassination of Nur Muhammad Taraki and therefore did not trust him. At this time, on December 1979, the Soviet Union decided to invade Afghanistan. 3 days later, Hafizullah Amin was pronounced dead in one of his palaces, and Soviets appointed Babar Karmal as new president of Afghanistan. By 1980s, the Mujahideen rebels rise against Soviet invaders and the USSR-backed Afghan army. As a result of the war, in 10 years, 2.8 million Afghans fled to Pakistan and another 1.5 million to Iran, and many more to the Central Asian neighboring countries in the region, in what was one of the largest refugee migration in recent history. I was actually one of those refugees myself, and I remember at the age of 5 when I left Afghanistan to Tajikistan. So it is us, the new generation, that have to take a stand for the innocent interests of humanity. Let's be realistic. We cannot act blind anymore. This is time that we open up our eyes and realize that every day we have victims of war, terrorism, torture, women abuse in Afghanistan on a daily basis. This extreme culture with its unacceptable behavior is not tolerated by Afghans Against Extremism at all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahendran. That was very powerful. Now, last but not least, I'd like to introduce Omar Latif, who's a member of the community of progressive Pakistani-Canadians. Omar has been working towards his goals since 1980s. Please give it up for Omar.
So we formed the Committee of Progressive Pakistani-Canadians in 1982, and we formed it in solidarity with the democratic movement against the dictator Ziaul Haq. We stand, like the Afghans Against Extremism, for 3 or 4 key things. One is secularism, which means a separation of state and religion, where people are allowed to exercise their religious beliefs without interference from the state or from anybody else. We believe in the equality of men and women and all national groups, regardless of skin color or ethnicity. We are very strongly in favor of peace. Peace without war, so that social funds can be used for social purposes rather than for military purposes and for destruction. And fourthly, we stand for democracy, but a democracy which is truly a democracy where the people rule, where it's a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. In the Committee of Progressive Pakistani-Canadians, it's a left group, and we have members of the NDP, we have independent socialists, and we have communists also. I personally am a member of the Communist Party of Canada. I went to Afghanistan in 1987, and I went as a guest of the PDPA. Many of the things that I will say you will not like or agree, but there is one thing that I think all sane people agree, that the terrorism against Afghanistan based from Pakistan must end. Let me begin from my perspective. 1947, Pakistan was created. The only country to oppose it, to not give it recognition and to oppose its induction into the United Nations was Afghanistan. And the reason was the Durand Line. Durand, a British officer, had made up that line, or British authorities had made up that line, cutting right through the Pakhtun nation and the Baluch nation, and the people who went to market on the Peshawar side or the Quetta side, they were allocated to Pakistan, and the people who went to market in Jalalabad and Kabul, etc., they were assigned to Afghanistan. It is like drawing a knife through the living heart of a nation. It was done, 1883, 1893. Pakistan said, this is our country, we have the inheritor-successor rights. Afghanistan said, no, they are Pakhtuns, and if not us, at least they should have national autonomy. This created quite a bit of stress and problems between Afghanistan and Pakistan. They allied themselves to the United States and to Britain and entered into pacts, military pacts with them against the Soviet Union. So Pakistan and Afghanistan fell into and I say it was mainly because of Pakistan's fault. Pakistan, because Afghanistan favored the Pakhtun nation, they were against Afghanistan. Because they were somewhat secular, although religion was very involved out there, Pakistan said, we are the Islamic Republic. Thirdly, Afghanistan had very good relations with India, and Pakistan said, no, you cannot have good relations with India because we have to have influence over you. These things, and also because of the alliances that Pakistan had against the Soviet Union, they wanted to have constant pressure and influence over Kabul. The Afghan intellectual and a member of the PDPA. They thought that the PDPA would become scared. It didn't happen. There were mass political demonstrations in Kabul, unprecedented in history, with red flags, with slogans saying that we want a socialist and a communist government. The entire PDPA, as it was pointed out, was arrested. They were held in the Fulecharhi, a prison. The cabinet was making a decision that they would be executed. It was at that time that the instructions went out by the PDPA to its cells in the army and the air force: seize power if you can, and they did. Vatanyar, he crashed the palace, and the bombing itself took place, right? You see, if we don't learn from history, we will repeat it time and time again. Many efforts from Amanullah and from Dawood were made in Afghanistan. There is this notion that the Afghans are barbaric or they are somehow backward people. It is simply not true. 1920, the reforming king Amanullah, he recognizes the Soviet Union and he institutes reforms. He's beaten back. Dawood makes a reform. He's beaten back. And so this pendulum again, that reforms are instituted by the PDPA, women's equality and all those things, the land reform, the abolishing of the monies that were owed to the landlords, all those things. And so what happens? You guys are all educated. In physics, there's a law. It says every action has a reaction. In the social sciences, there's a law. Every revolution has a counter-revolution. It can be of a Galileo who says that the earth is moving. It can be of anything whatsoever. There was a counter-revolution also. The United States, it has never liked a revolution anywhere in the world, whether it is Cuba, Nicaragua, China, Vietnam, right? They were opposed to it. And so, because they don't want to spread their views at all into Pakistan. The second major player is, of course, Pakistan. Pakistan had been taken over by an Islamist fascist general, General Zia-ul-Haq, who said that we want to have control over Afghanistan, and we are going to do it through Islamists, and the Islamists had already, the Afghan Islamists had already come to Peshawar and Pakistan. It is simply not true that the Mujahideen were helped by Pakistan after December 1979. April 27th, the Soil Revolution takes place. From day one, Pakistan and America were involved in arming them. You look up Zbigniew Brzezinski's article in Time magazine that appeared at that time, shortly after, Caravans Under Moonless Nights. And he tells you how they started to arm the Afghan Mujahideen. And then, when the Soviets came in on December the 27th, 1979, 18 months later, every single Mujahid leader, Rabbani, Haqqani, Mujaddadi, Saif, and all the others, they were in Peshawar and being armed by these people. Pakistan. So it now is run by generals who are anti-India, and the new Afghan government is also friendly with India. They are also doing the bidding of the United States, as they always have, and they want to sort of have influence over here. Then they also want to make sure that the friendship with India doesn't go anywhere. Saudi Arabia has very specific policy goals. It is not that they are good people or bad people, but they are a monarchy. They are a monarchy. So, what are the 4 or 5 key things that they want in this world? They want self-protection for themselves and their interest and their money. They are opposed to any Republican ideals. So, they were opposed to Nasser's government in Egypt. They were opposed to the Assad government who overthrew the king in Syria. They were opposed to the Ba'ath government in Iraq who overthrew the Ba'athist monarchy. They are opposed to anybody who's got any whatsoever ideas of social justice, of equality for women, because this is their view of the world. Before 73, they had spent a lot of money on their cause, on their views. After 1973, something happened. What? They became flush with money. Why? Because the price of oil went up from $2 a barrel to 20, 30, etc. Billions of dollars they got, and now they have this ideology which they are exporting, their view that they are exporting, and now they've got the wherewithal to do so. Why is Pakistan so important? Pakistan is their neighbor. There are 1.5 million Pakistanis inside Saudi Arabia as laborers, right? They don't want any radical influences in Pakistan because they think it might come to us. These things, Pakistan and the West, and Saudi Arabia, all of them then got together and they started to fund the armed Mujahideen massively, because the opposition to the PDPA also grew massively when the Soviet troops came. We say they have 6, you have 10 consulates, but then you've got to have tourism and trade and commercial relations. So some army generals, they want to continue the war other army generals are saying, stop it, and that is why we have seen the fight against the Mujahideen and the Taliban in the federally administered tribal areas which border Afghanistan with Pakistan. We want the left in Pakistan, the left here. We want peaceful relations. We are totally opposed to the regime in Saudi Arabia. But we don't think that it is anybody's task to go in and overthrow that regime. It is the task of the Saudi people to do so, right? And so we can give them our moral support. Similarly, we want that no more war, no more fundamentalism, no more attacks against Afghanistan, overt or covert, should take place from Pakistan. We have tried to do this for 30 odd years in Canada, and the left in Pakistan has tried to do that for even longer. I hope that we will have peace between the two countries soon. I thank you.
Now we have another 5 minutes before we wrap up, but last question from her.
Question of like why has been answered, but how exactly? By just like we're gonna like raise awareness and discuss these issues, but is there anything else?
So, I guess we discussed this more in internal meetings, so I'm not going to get too far in depth into it. But yes, the first step of many organizations is just that, like raising awareness. But as we discussed earlier, a grassroots movement needs to begin in Afghanistan for this to take place.
Yes, this question goes out to anyone. In regards to the Taliban, what would be a better proposition? Should the Americans stay in aid, or would that be a task of the Afghan army?
Can you repeat that again, please?
Yes.
Clear, louder, please.
What would be a better proposition in regards to the demise of the Taliban? Should the Americans stay and help, or should that be a task of the Afghan army?
Okay, I want to start off by answering your question to the fact that around 4 or 5 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, one of the North Key Kunduz province of Afghanistan was taken by Taliban within hours. And there is no way that Afghanistan will survive without international troops in Afghanistan. There's no way, because Taliban could take over all of Afghanistan in like a week. Why? Because Taliban live within people. Taliban brings up a big discussion. Now we have to discuss what type of Taliban there are. There's Afghani Talibans, there's Pakistani Talibans, there's good Talibans, there's bad Talibans. That some people say, oh, there's no good Talibans, but there's actually people inside Talibans, inside Afghanistan, they actually do care for the country. And there's others, like Talibans or other people that were in charge of destroying Buddhists, destroying history of Afghanistan, or any types of, those are the Taliban that we are very seriously against them. And getting back to you, the Taliban, I would personally highly answer that question with a big no. Afghanistan will not survive without Americans or NATO troops at all.
All right, just one last question.
All right, so you clearly highlighted, Mr. Latif, you clearly highlighted that you are against Pakistan's military department and whatnot. But what would your stance about the Operation Zarb-e-Arz and Rahul Sharif's intervention in Pakistan, eliminating all Taliban threats, 90% of them, by the way, in Pakistan? How do you feel about that?
Sure. So Zarb-e-Arz is the operation that the military gave, like, Operation Desert Storm or whatever, to attack the Taliban in the frontier area near Afghanistan. And they had a state there within the state. They had a radio station and they had tax collecting agencies, etc., etc. So as I said, that they were the good Taliban so long as they did two things. One, that they went after the Afghan government and wanted to replace it with one which was very favorable to the Pakistani side, and the other was that they kept on creating problems for India. Well, these guys did those two things, or different sections of them did those two things, but then they became uncontrollable. The pressure from America, the pressure from China itself, it is very heavy on Pakistan. China developed the huge port at Gwadar, huge deep sea water port, one. And they have just given last year $47 billion worth of infrastructure investments into Pakistan, and they said, peace, we don't want anything more, because as I said earlier, these guys are going into China also from there. So that's the reason why the Pakistani army is attacking them, and they've started to attack the Pakistani army too. But not all Pakistani generals and not all Pakistani security agencies are in favor of prosecuting that war. All of you almost are Afghans here. You've got to, please, in your school, and there are very few Pakistanis here, and I'm very saddened by that fact, that if you meet with Pakistanis, please tell them that the Taliban are a bane to them and a bane to us. We can't have a society where women are forced to wear the veil. If they want to, it's their business. But to force that the Shia are killed, in Pakistan they are killed, or that the Shia should be lesser people out there, that people have the right to have their beliefs, but it shouldn't be forced on anybody else. If you meet with Pakistanis, tell them that it is in the interests of both countries and both peoples that we live peacefully with each other.
Before we wrap up,
Actually, I wanted to add up to what Omar said, and I appreciate what he said actually. And that's what we work on too. Actually, I personally have a lot of Pakistani friends, and I just want everybody to know that there might be a gap between us. There might be political issues that we might having because of the border or any other issues that there is. And there's never been, because good people everywhere existing. We have no problem with Pakistani people at all. We have friends and stuff like that with a lot of Pakistani people. And same as all the group members, and that's what we go around, we talk, we discuss Afghans Against Extremism. So we cannot be a part of a group of Afghans Against Extremism and be extremists ourselves.
Sure.
So we definitely agree with you, and we keep it that way.
Ali and I were talking that if this worked out, maybe we could do it, this kind of a talk or a panel, in areas where there is lots of Pakistanis and maybe Afghans and Iranians to North York, for instance, or in the Mississauga area, or even downtown, the University of Toronto. For downtown people, it's very hard to come, and there are large communities out there. So maybe if this worked out, maybe we could do things there too.
There's a lot of Pakistanis here actually. I'm part of people.
Yeah, no, I am. Okay, but I'm very saddened that they're not here. Okay.
Didn't know.
Thank you so much.
all right. A couple of things that I'd like to add up before we wrap up. First off, a comment where a lot of you guys might have a lot of questions still. What I can suggest you to do is that send any of the executive team members a direct message, and we'll definitely get back to you with that. As well as you can follow us on Facebook. It's called Afghans Against Extremism, and for those of you guys who are part of York University, you can follow our student page, Afghan Students Against Extremism. I'd like to just comment on one of the things that Omar said. I really love the fact that he gave the comment where he said history repeats itself eventually, and if we don't learn from history, unfortunately it won't be on our favor. So I just hope that tonight that you came out, it has been an eye-opener for all of you guys, and I hope that you guys have learned as much as we tried to give out. And thank you all for coming. That means a lot. You guys made this event happen. I also would like to thank our 3 amazing camera guys. Thanks so much. That means a lot, and you guys have yourself a wonderful evening.
A round of applause for them.